Hello, you have reached the voicemail of the GENART Podcast. I'm your host, Camille Roux, and as an artist myself, I'm excited to discuss our creative journeys in this second episode. Where do your ideas start? What are the main steps from the beginning to the end of your projects? Does your creative method change with each project, or is it consistent? How important is feedback in shaping your work? I'm fascinated by the diverse way we artists create. Please share your experiences by leaving a message after the beep. Thank you.
Hey Camille, Owen here. I was thinking about the question you asked, and I think that my projects start from a curiosity when I'm learning new technologies and techniques. I'm working on technical studies pretty frequently, and what always ends up happening is halfway through I start to imagine what I could be creating with it. Usually I'll jot down a written note or sketch out some ideas on an iPad so I don't forget about it, but often I'll get actually carried away and start prototyping a rough sketch immediately. Over the years, I've decided to maintain a repository where I can collect these as references to look at later. Usually I'll work on it for like an hour or so, and then I decide that, okay, that idea has been captured. Let's get back to the studies and finish learning what I set out to accomplish. So later, when I do come back to them, I have more fresh eyes, and I like to try and see what still speaks to me. I may dig in, do some further experiments, see how far I could push the initial concept. And at this phase, it's very much just dirty, just kind of exploring, playing with ideas, no particular goal in mind. It's not until later on when I'm out for a long daily walk, which is something I'd recommend to everybody. The ideas start to float around my mind, and they either solidify into a concept that I really want to dig into, or they simply fade away. Usually elements of different experiments that I've done in this repository end up being pulled into like a larger, more cohesive concept. So even some of the experiments where maybe I couldn't push it that far, it might have had an interesting idea that I can bring into a different project or a different idea. This mental process, I find, repeats itself as I move on from prototype into actually developing a project. And it's beneficial because it allows me to pivot when I need to, or if something comes up that makes the concept stronger, I can shift into that direction. And I find that this process, while it repeats, eventually it starts narrowing in further and further into the final project as it moves close to completion. I'd say that this process has been fairly consistent throughout my practice. Earlier on, I think I made more discoveries that became projects, whereas now I find that I'm a little bit more intentional at the outset, and these experiments tend to influence the idea more rather than define them. I suspect part of this comes from knowing a little bit more about what I'm actually capable of and having a stronger idea of what I would like to say in my work. Great question. Thanks. I'll chat with you later. Bye.
Hey Camille, it's Kristian Stoveland here. Just want to get back to you on your questions regarding the creative process. The creative process on each project is probably different every time, but I think in broad strokes, you could probably say that every project starts off with a phase where you're talking about conceptual work, thinking a lot, seeking inspiration from, your environment, the internet, art, design, music, anything, but actively seeking that, trying to build your conceptual base and the narrative you want to spread out there. And at some point, I start on the actual writing of code and working on the aesthetics, and it often ends up being a iterative process, jumping from the actual aesthetics part back to the idea, and then testing out a lot of ideas. And at some point, I hopefully get a result that I'm very happy with, and probably just have details to work on. This is often the time where I start working on color palettes, and up until this point I often work in black and white just to purify the aesthetics and then kind of dazzle it with color afterwards. I think that process there, that also applies to my work at Void too. It just involves a lot more people and a lot more disciplines. But in essence, I think that is the basic of how I work, and using my creative process to get to the end of my projects. I hope that answers your questions. It was fun to do this little think. I'll catch you later. Bye-bye.
On this GENART Podcast, where ideas ignite, art's magic unfolds in the soft moonlight. Algorithms dancing, pixels start to glow. In the realm of code, creativity will show.
Hi Camille, this is Jacek Markusiewicz again. I wanted to say a few words about the importance of feedback in my creative process. So I really struggle with it, not with receiving or processing the feedback itself, but with the fact that in order to receive feedback, I inevitably need to show the project before I believe it's finished. Now, the act of publishing my work is about showing to the world months of personal experiences. Look, this is what I've been dealing with. This is me now. It's the culmination of the process. So doing that before it's finished opens up a window for potentially a huge stream of external input that could affect the work to the extent that I believe I wouldn't be comfortable with. But I do discuss my work with very few closest people, but it's almost always about my relation to the work and how I'm dealing with the process, not so much about the work itself. Sometimes I share the theoretical background of the work so that I make sure that it's consistent and understandable. But very rarely I share the work in progress results, because it almost always leads to the discussion about visual and formal decisions, which are very important, but I don't know what I could even do with comments about the aesthetics of my work. Should I adjust it so that the biggest possible number of people will like my work? I feel it might work for products of mass consumption, but I don't feel it's the objective of my art.
Hi Camille, it's yourself. I think today the best way to describe my creative process is like creating my own modular synth and playing with it. A modular synth is a way to produce sound, mostly used in electronic music, and it's composed of different modules, and they are linked by cables, and each module can do a simple thing like a filter or generating a sound. And I like to think my project like that. So in the first time, I'm thinking to some modules. Sometimes it can be a texture. Sometimes it can be a module to generate the composition or a specific thing I want to code first. and then I link them and try to play with them. So at the beginning, I have a very small idea of where it goes. But yeah, I like to improvise. I like to accept error. Let's see where it goes. And after that, when the project starts to look to something I like, I'm thinking to the meaning. It's more and more important to me. And I like to link my project to something very personal. And I like that because it became constraints to know what I want to do now, because it can be endless to create a new module and play with them. So having a meaning help me to have constraints to know what I have to do or not now. And yeah, it is the way it goes. And for the end, just listen to the first episode and you will have the answer. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take a chance, unleashing my thoughts. In a podcast, there's little from this episode. We take a chance, unleashing my thoughts. In a podcast, there's expressing emotions and all of the story. The GENART Podcast, the source of the story, guiding us through.
Hi Camille, this is Jonathan Barbeau from Quebec City. Where I get my ideas when I make my generative art, it's a bit complicated. I get a lot of ideas and I often don't really execute on them. Why? Because, I don't know, when I try to make something that I had a prior idea, I often... when I'm working on it, I'm often like underwhelmed by what's happening or what I'm creating. And what's worked best for me is just sometimes I just start the code editor, start coding, make a circle, make a line, make a whatever. And then, I don't know, I'm going to create like 1,000 of those. And then I'm going to move them with, for example, right now, I'm mostly working with noise. So I'm going to like use noise to move them. And then, okay, we get a flow field. Okay, what's next? Then I'm going to, try to change the threshold of the noise. And then, this create these weird shapes. And then I get ideas. And then I'm starting to work towards these new ideas that I've like, it's as if the program, the art is showing me like an idea or a path that I could take. And this is normally where I create a Git branch. And when I create a Git branch, I often like says, this is a whip and a name that describe very generally what it is. And then I move throughout that path. And then sometime a new idea come up. And this is where I'm going to create a new Git branch. This is why I've been building like a huge backlog over the last few months. And I have like a lot of different projects. And this is all like Git branch. And I only have like one directory with like a main branch that's like very bare bone. And all these branches that are stemming out from there, there are all different ideas that I use or that I explore. And it's a bit like making a path through the jungle, So like there's the main camp, and then one idea generate a few other ideas that then generate another ideas. And then it's very fun to see how one initial idea can be multiplied and become like this infinite number of like project that could be made from that single ideas, and with all of them having like different style, different different aspect ratio, different colors. So this is the way I'm working on stuff. I see some other artists that have like a clear idea and then they sketch it on a book and then they work on it and code it. And yeah, for me, this isn't really working right now. I would love for it to work because I have like so many ideas already in my head. But yeah, I'm mostly creating ideas while creating by itself. This is a bit of how I'm working, and how I know it's done. It's a bit like the one from last week, the other podcast episode. Sometimes I just need to finish with an idea and then move over to another. Or if I feel like I cannot push it further without it being something else completely, then it's going to stay like this. It's going to stay at that point for a while, and then I'm going to start working on it to get it done. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.
Hey, Camille. This is James Merrill calling into the GENART Podcast from sunny, beautiful Vermont this morning with a response to your question about where does your generative art come from? So when I'm thinking about making a new project, I usually start with the story. What kind of story do I want to tell with this art? And what is the visual way of doing that? I'll start to kind of concoct these stories in my head and then jot them down into a sketchbook and put a tab on the page and just keep writing and just build out different ideas and directions I can take. And I might go back to that a couple years later and actually do it, but I like to just always have that flow going. And these stories kind of come from my life. The way I see it is my art is a reflection of my experiences, and it's kind of like a funhouse mirror where whatever comes in might not be what comes out, but there's a process in there. And that's kind of my artistic practice in a nutshell. Then when I think about a project, it's really more than just the visuals. I have a bunch of questions I start to ask myself, like, how am I going to represent this story end to end? So will I be making a video for this? Will I be presenting this in person? Will it be purely online? And then there's some technical questions too, like, is this a long form project or am I curating outputs? Do I want to evolve this over time, or once it's done, it's done? And is it purely digital? Am I printing it? Or am I doing plotter art? And with plotter art specifically, there's a lot that goes into it that influences how you program it from the get-go, because you're not ever going to have a fill, you only have strokes. So I find my plotter art is really divergent from the digital artworks I've done in the past. So once I kind of know the direction I want to take, I start to think about what impediments I have, and I'll hyper focus on those. So a good example of this is a lot of times with my plotter art, I have to deal with occlusion and filling shapes with patterns and that sort of thing. And that's actually kind of non-trivial. To do that effectively, you need to implement some mathematics to calculate your intersections and try to figure out, whether things should be in front of each other or behind each other, because a plotter doesn't know or care. It's always just going to draw everything on the screen. So if you want to create more of maybe a three-dimensional environment or some sort of pattern work, you have to kind of code that. So I'll occasionally hit these huge impediments like that and just try to solve hyper-specific problems. So if you go to my Twitter, you'll see that oftentimes I post my debug views. And I'm just there trying to solve these problems where it's like, how exactly would I solve this? And those are building blocks. So I'll just kind of build up from there to create this space where I'm able to be extremely creative without having to get super technical. I can just use implementations that exist that are in my kind of catalog of code to be really creative and try things without getting bogged down with issues and errors and possibilities. So now I'm kind of in experimental phase. I know what I want to create roughly, and I have the tools to do it. So I'll try to experiment as much as possible to find those little things in generative art that we all know and love, where there are chance occurrences and they're kind of like issues or mistakes or bugs or things that you just didn't anticipate happening, and oftentimes make your art much better. So I try to create a space to have that happen for some time. And now the project's becoming more formed. Maybe I'm starting to think about my traits, that sort of thing. And along the way, I always snapshot the art. So I always have kind of this list of JPEGs with numbers as file names that show me the progression of the artwork. And sometimes I'll go back and reflect upon that mid-project just to see if I'm still going in the direction that I intended upon when I first started. Eventually, hopefully the artwork's looking pretty good now, but it's probably pretty inconsistent. And I know if I'm doing long form work, or even if I'm curating outputs, I need to start to look at it more holistically. So one of the biggest things with generative art is we always look at, say, a static JPEG or maybe a live render if we're really fancy. But it's really only the artist, I think, and some really adept collectors who look at the whole collection and start to look at the generative system itself. And I find that when you're developing generative art, you need to take that view because you're, in some sense, responsible for everything that comes out of that space. Huge burden, right? So what I do is I've built a tool where I can batch render, say, 500 or 1,000 outputs, and then review them side by side or in a grid format to start to understand what the surface of the art looks like. So I'm looking for specific iterations that look really good or really bad or really uncharacteristic of the rest of the art, and I'll flag them and start to review what made them. So I might look at all the traits and start to see whether they are cohesive or not. And from there, I'll take that and tune the algorithm so that the results are then crafted maybe either from or away from that specific look and feel. And I do think that this varies from project to project because I haven't just done long form work. I've done a lot of plotter art and that sort of thing too. And I'm always kind of building up that collection of utilities that I've made in the past to solve specific problems. And I know that at one point last year, I developed a specific utility to kind of bend polygons around multi-lines. Pretty technical, but I used that in every project for a year because it was like such a big help that I kind of made a look and feel across projects from that. And it's evolved over the year. And I think that, as I continue to develop these tools, my art will change because I'll be globbing onto them and recompiling them in different ways. So now, hopefully, at this stage, my artwork has been curated. I've looked at a lot of them. My colors are dialed in, that sort of thing too. And this is where I start to seek feedback. And I think feedback, for one, is super important. Like if you work in a vacuum, bad things can happen. Like you can go down a path that, you might start to get tunnel vision, and you need that outside perspective because you may be missing big pieces that might not be that big at all. They might be like subtle little nuanced things that you would have seen yourself had you not been staring at this for thousands of iterations. So this is why I think soliciting feedback from people you trust is really important. And the way that I do this usually is I'll create a document that explains that vision and that story and introduces the critic to the art in a way that I would like it to be presented. And then I'll introduce them to the art and let them look over it and say, hey, whatever comes to mind, let me know. Like, you can't be too critical here. Like, I need to hear it. And I think you need to do that because otherwise people are just going to say, hey, this looks great. Like, it's no different than just posting on Twitter. People are going to give you a like and move on, and you're going to feel great. And you're going to miss the actual important aspect of feedback, which is maybe hearing something you don't want to hear, like that you're not ready to release it, that there's some issues that you need to address, that your story is not coherent through the art. And that's when your art becomes great. When you hear that and you adjust. For me, at least, I've found that I'm 80-90% of the way there. I just need a little push and the art becomes much better from that. So with that said, I think you do have to prepare yourself for feedback when you solicit it. Like, you might hear things you don't want to hear. And that's just, you have to be open to that and be ready to expect it. So once your feedback's in, you've done your last updates, like now it's almost time for your project to be ready. And this is where I kind of just tweak and optimize it. So I try to make the performance as good as it could possibly be. And I like to make the file size as small as I possibly could be. And there's tooling that does this that in the web development field is very ubiquitous, and the GenArt field maybe a little bit less so, but there are things like Vite, which will help you out a lot. And hopefully then you have a little snippet of JavaScript that's the best art you've ever made that's going to blow everyone's mind, and you can go ahead and upload it. Hopefully that was helpful. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Hey, Camille. This is Stevan Dedovic. It's great to be here. With my creative process, the focus is on experimentation and creating a quick and fun feedback cycle. I view creativity as play, and I try to remove as much of the tedium as that can get in the way and slow things down. A lot of my time is spent on creating this environment, on writing software libraries for color manipulation, 3D projection, all kinds of geometric operations. I have project templates for a few languages and frameworks as well. And then when I get that itch to create some inspiration to make something new, I will pour myself some tea, put on music, and just go heads down for hours. Other times, I like to work under limitations. For instance, when I'm flying on an airplane, that's one of my favorite places to work on generative art, and almost every flight I'm there on my laptop. I don't have internet, I cannot Google for help, and I'm stuck with my machine and just my tools. These limitations often force me to improve on existing algorithms, or just to make art that is simple in construction, while having more meaning or really putting extra effort on aesthetics, on these things that I think really matter in the end. When I start my projects, almost always I'm recreating something I've seen. Sometimes it's an algorithm, other times it's a tiling pattern I saw at a museum or just on the street. There's that saying about artists stealing, and I really take this to heart. Motivation and inspiration can come from anywhere, and allowing them to take hold of me is really where I find my flow. I would say that creative methods do not change much during my projects. They don't really change across projects either. I typically find something cool, try it out myself, play around with it, and either it looks good, I'm motivated, I keep going, or I get tired, bored, and I put it down. And I repeat this process. Being able to split my work up into these rigorous technical parts and the fun, creative, free-flowing parts really helps me avoid burnout and allows me to make progress depending on how I feel. Though, when I have deadlines, that's a different story. And finally, feedback is crucial. Sharing my art with my friends and family, with other artists, either classical or generative, it's important. And so often I find myself with a piece of art that I've made that I dislike, I don't want to publish or share, but I end up doing it at the insistence of the people around me. I find myself to be my biggest critic, and the people around me really help, and without them, I wouldn't be anywhere. I hope this was insightful and maybe inspiring to your audience. Again, my name is Stevan Dedovic, and thank you so much for having me on